The pill bottle hit the floor before I even understood he was shouting at me. It rolled beneath the refrigerator, making a hollow sound as it disappeared into the dark. For a second, I just stared at the empty space where it had been, the air heavy with something raw and burning. "You're not a charity, Mom," my son said. "We're done being your caretakers. You need to move out." His voice was sharp enough to slice through the steam from the kettle behind me. The smell of burnt toast mixed with that metallic tang of anger. He looked nothing like the boy I raised. His face was red, eyes narrowed, veins visible along his neck. His wife stood by the counter, pretending to be busy on her phone. She always pretended. I didn't say a word. My hand reached for the edge of the counter to steady myself. The pain in my chest had become a rhythm by now, pulsing in time with the silence between his words. I bent down slowly, knees protesting, fingers trembling only slightly as I touched the cold tile. The pills were scattered, small, white, familiar. I picked them up one by one. I'd done that all my life, really, picking things up after people. Dropped dreams, broken promises, unpaid bills. When I straightened up, he was still glaring at me. "Do you even hear yourself?" I asked. My voice came out quiet, almost foreign to me. He scoffed. "We took you in when you couldn't handle being alone. We gave you a home, and you treat us like villains. You should be grateful." I looked at him for a long moment. I wanted to remind him that the mortgage papers carried my signature, that I'd signed them with hands cracked from years of double shifts. But I didn't. People who rewrite the past never listen to the truth. So I just reached for the kettle and poured the water into my cup. The hiss filled the kitchen like a sigh too long held in. "You don't have to be dramatic," he muttered, opening a can of soda. "Just go." "I will," I said. "When?" "Tomorrow." He laughed under his breath, that cruel, dismissive sound people make when they think they've already won. I let him have it. It didn't matter anymore. Tomorrow was closer than he thought. I sat at the kitchen table, hands around my mug, watching the steam curl like smoke. The sun cut through the blinds in thin white stripes, drawing lines across the countertop. Everything was painfully ordinary. The fridge hummed. The dog thumped its tail against the floor. Upstairs, one of the kids was crying. For a moment, I remembered another morning years ago, in another kitchen, smaller, older, but full of laughter. My son Evan was 5. He'd spilled orange juice all over his cereal, and I laughed so hard I cried. His father was still alive then, still smiling. I remembered the way sunlight fell through the window, the way Evan's little hands clapped together, sticky with sugar. It felt like another life. Maybe it was. He turned his back now, muttering something about bills and groceries, about how much things cost, as if I hadn't been paying half of them, as if the money I slipped into his account every month had somehow turned invisible. When he left the room, I stood by the sink, tracing the rim of my cup with one finger. The sound of running water filled the silence. I could hear Clara, his wife, talking softly upstairs, the kind of soft that hides venom underneath. I wiped the counter, cleaned the crumbs, did what I always did, made the space neat before leaving it. Then I went to my room, the one they called the guest room. It used to be a storage space. There was a washing machine in the corner, humming all night. The air smelled like detergent and damp towels. My old nightstand stood beside the cot. Inside the drawer was an envelope, yellowed, fragile, but whole. I took it out, just to touch it. The ink of my name hadn't faded. Leona Cross. My name on the deed. My name on the mortgage. My house. I placed it back carefully, like a secret too heavy to hold for long. Then, I sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped, and listened to the hum of the dryer. It was the same rhythm I'd once heard in the hospital machines, the sound of something barely alive, holding on because it didn't know how to stop. I'd been a nurse for 40 years. I'd seen bodies give up quietly, without noise or drama. I'd seen people cling to life even when it hurt. That's what I was doing now. I realized, clinging to something long gone. The illusion of family. I lay down but didn't sleep. The ceiling above me was a patchwork of shadows from the laundry light. I thought of the house I used to share with my husband before the cancer came, the sound of his breathing at night, the way his hand felt against mine. After he died, the house felt too empty, too loud with ghosts. Evan had said moving in with him would make things easier. Family should stay together, he'd told me. I'd believed him. The clock ticked. Somewhere upstairs, laughter broke out, then silence. I closed my eyes and let the darkness stretch. The ache in my chest eased into something steady, something like resolve. Tomorrow, I thought again. Tomorrow I leave, but not the way he expects. I woke before dawn. The house was still, wrapped in that thin blue light that makes everything look like it's holding its breath. My body ached the way old wood groans before a storm, but I didn't mind. I had plans. I moved quietly, careful not to wake anyone. The dog lifted its head when I passed, but didn't bark. It always liked me more than them. In the kitchen, I filled the kettle again, the metal soft under my hand. There's comfort in small rituals: tea, steam, waiting. I leaned against the counter and looked around the kitchen. Every corner of it carried my fingerprints. The oak table I bought, the curtains I sewed, even the tiles I had chosen them myself, years ago when the house was still new and full of promise. Now it felt like a stage where I had been written out of the script. When the kettle whistled, I turned it off. Steam clouded the window, blurring the garden outside. The roses I'd planted last spring had withered from neglect. Clara didn't water them. Too much work, she'd said. I remember thinking how easily people call care a burden when they've never had to give it. I poured my tea and sat down. The house began to stir upstairs, the thump of small feet, the flush of a toilet, a door closing. I waited. I listened. I wanted to memorize the sounds before they no longer belonged to me. The day before, when he'd called me a burden, I had almost answered, almost told him what he owed me, but that would have made me smaller. I've learned that when people erase you, the quiet becomes your sharpest weapon. I finished my tea and went back to my room. The light flickered through the narrow basement window, painting a pale square on the wall. I opened the drawer again, but this time I didn't just touch the envelope. I opened it. Inside were documents that smelled faintly of ink and time. The mortgage contract, the payment receipts, the insurance papers, all with my name printed clearly. I traced the letters with my thumb, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the tea. I'd almost forgotten what power looked like when it wasn't loud. On the table, beside me lay a notebook, the same one I used to jot down grocery lists and medication times. I opened to a blank page and began writing not a list this time, but a record. Every check I'd written, every repair I'd paid for, every insult I'd swallowed. The words came steady, calm, precise. They used to say at the hospital that I had a surgeon's hands steady under pressure. They still were. When I finished, I closed the notebook and smiled. The sound of the washing machine, starting its cycle, drifted in. I looked toward the door. "You keep spinning," I whispered. "It's what we do." By mid-morning, the sun had climbed high, spilling warmth through the basement window. I heard Evan's car pull out of the driveway. Clara's voice echoed faintly, giving orders to the kids. I stayed where I was, breathing slow, steady, invisible. There's a strange freedom in being unseen. People stop guarding their words. You start hearing the truth behind the walls. I heard Clara on the phone upstairs, her voice flat and cold. "She'll leave soon," she said. "Once she's gone, we can refinance." He promised she'd be out by the end of the month. I closed my eyes. The tea had gone cold, but I didn't care. Her words didn't hurt. Not anymore. They clarified things. They thought I had nowhere to go, no plan, no claim. They forgot the one thing I taught them long ago: always keep your records. Paper remembers what people choose to forget. I stood and straightened my bed. The faint scent of detergent filled the air. My hands were steady, my breath slow. I looked around the small room, the cracked concrete floor, the single bulb flickering above. It wasn't a room anymore. It was a chrysalis. Tomorrow, I thought once more, and for the first time in years, the word didn't sound like waiting. It sounded like beginning. I woke before dawn. The house was still, wrapped in that thin blue light that makes everything look like it's holding its breath. My body ached the way old wood groans before a storm, but I didn't mind. I had plans. I moved quietly, careful not to wake anyone. The dog lifted its head when I passed but didn't bark. It always liked me more than them. In the kitchen, I filled the kettle again, the metal soft under my hand. There's comfort in small rituals: tea, steam, waiting. I leaned against the counter and looked around the kitchen. Every corner of it carried my fingerprints. The oak table I bought, the curtains I sewed, Even the tiles, I had chosen them myself years ago when the house was still new and full of promise. Now it felt like a stage where I had been written out of the script. When the kettle whistled, I turned it off. Steam clouded the window, blurring the garden outside. The roses I'd planted last spring had withered from neglect. Clara didn't water them. Too much work, she'd said. I remember thinking how easily people call care a burden when they've never had to give it. I poured my tea and sat down. The house began to stir upstairs, the thump of small feet, the flush of a toilet, a door closing. I waited. I listened. I wanted to memorize the sounds before they no longer belonged to me. The day before, when he'd called me a burden, I had almost answered. Almost told him what he owed me. But that would have made me smaller. I've learned that when people erase you, the quiet becomes your sharpest weapon. I finished my tea and went back to my room. The light flickered through the narrow basement window, painting a pale square on the wall. I opened the drawer again, but this time I didn't just touch the envelope. I opened it. Inside were documents that smelled faintly of ink and time. The mortgage contract, the payment receipts, the insurance papers, all with my name printed clearly. I traced the letters with my thumb, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the tea. I'd almost forgotten what power looked like when it wasn't loud. On the table beside me lay a notebook, the same one I used to jot down grocery lists and medication times. I opened to a blank page and began writing not a list this time, but a record. Every check I'd written, every repair I'd paid for, every insult I'd swallowed. The words came steady, calm, precise. They used to say at the hospital that I had a surgeon's hand steady under pressure. They still were. When I finished, I closed the notebook and smiled. The sound of the washing machine starting its cycle drifted in. I looked toward the door. "You keep spinning," I whispered. "It's what we do." By mid-morning, the sun had climbed high, spilling warmth through the basement window. I heard Evan's car pull out of the driveway. Clara's voice echoed faintly, giving orders to the kids. I stayed where I was, breathing slow, steady, invisible. There's a strange freedom in being unseen. People stop guarding their words. You start hearing the truth behind the walls. I heard Clara on the phone upstairs, her voice flat and cold. "She'll leave soon," she said. "Once she's gone, we can refinance." He promised she'd be out by the end of the month. I closed my eyes. The tea had gone cold, but I didn't care. Her words didn't hurt. Not anymore. They clarified things. They thought I had nowhere to go, no plan, no claim. They forgot the one thing I taught them long ago: always keep your records. Paper remembers what people choose to forget. I stood and straightened my bed. The faint scent of detergent filled the air. My hands were steady, my breath slow. I looked around the small room, the cracked concrete floor, the single bulb flickering above. It wasn't a room anymore. It was a chrysalis. Tomorrow, I thought once more. And for the first time in years, the word didn't sound like waiting. It sounded like beginning. Night has a way of stretching a house into something larger than its walls. When the lights go out, the sounds grow bones. Pipes sigh, wood clicks. A drawer settles itself like a sleeper turning over. I lay awake and listened to everything the house wanted to say. It had learned my breath by now. I had learned its secrets, or at least the ones it was careless enough to whisper. Clara's laughter floated down the stairwell sometime after 10. It was the tight kind, the kind that hides sharp edges. Evan's voice answered, low and soothing, like he was taming something. They moved through the rooms above me, while I traced the outline of the small window near the ceiling with my eyes. A car passed on the street outside. Headlights slipped across the wall and left me in the soft blue again. I got up, not because I needed anything, but because staying still made the thoughts louder. The concrete was cool. I padded to the laundry sink and rinsed my cup, careful not to clang porcelain against metal. The air smelled like lavender detergent, and the citrus cleaner Clara liked to spray on every surface as if she could sanitize a person out of a space. When I turned, I caught my reflection in the small square of glass above the washer. My face looked even, the kind of calm that used to help frightened patients breathe. Years change the body, but they sharpen the part of you that watches. I set the cup down and listened again. A television droned upstairs. The laugh track rose and fell. Then the volume clicked off. I returned to my bed and pulled the thin blanket to my shoulders. I thought of a different night, a very old one, when Evan was 11 and feverish. He had curled against me on the couch and pressed his hot cheek into my sleeve. The whole apartment had smelled like menthol and soup. I remember the sound of his breathing as it calmed, the small catches smoothing out as the medicine began to work. I sat awake until morning then too. Some habits never fall out of you. Loving is one of them. So is listening. The morning came pale and damp. I rose before the alarm and brewed tea. The kettle sang softly, a song I had heard more times than any hymn. I poured the water and thought about the day like it was a long hallway I needed to walk down. At the top of the stairs, a door opened. Small feet thumped. There was a sleepy protest and a giggle. I smiled in spite of myself. Children make the air sweeter just by breathing in it. Clara appeared at the stairwell in a robe that looked expensive. Her hair was piled on her head like a crown she had forgotten to take off. She paused when she saw me at the counter. For a heartbeat, she looked almost human with sleep. Then her eyes sharpened. "You are up early," she said. Her voice hovered on the line between politeness and the cold part underneath. "Old bodies wake before the sun," I said gently. She moved past me to the fridge and took out almond milk. She poured without looking, her hand steady in the way that shows practice. "Do you mind keeping the noise down here in the mornings?" she asked. "The kids need to rest. They have activities." "Of course," I said. I rinsed my spoon, even though it was already clean. I dried the few droplets in the sink, as if quiet could be made visible, and folded into a towel. We stood there like strangers in a waiting room. She scrolled her phone. I pretended to read the back of a tea box. In any other life, we might have found a softer version of each other. But life does not always hand you the versions you could have loved. Evan came down in a shirt that had not been ironed well. He kissed his wife on the cheek and nodded in my direction without meeting my eyes. "Morning," he said. His voice was already tired. I wondered what his voice sounded like when he spoke to someone who could give him what he wanted. I set my cup on the drying rack and wiped the counter again. There is a way to leave a room that makes no sound. Nurses learn it early. Mothers perfect it later. I moved down the hallway and into my small room and closed the door softly. The list in my notebook from yesterday waited where I had left it. I added 2 lines because it felt practical to do so. One for the grocery card I topped off last week when the pantry looked spare. One for the cash I slipped into the piano teacher's hand when she smiled apologetically on the stoop. She had come to tell Clara she needed to raise her rates. Clara had not answered the door. I had. After lunch, I heard them talking in the dining room. The floorboards above my head are honest. Voices drift through them like rain through leaves. "She is always in the way," Clara said. "She cooks," Evan said. "She cooks what she wants," Clara replied. "She buys brands we do not use. She leaves her glasses everywhere. The downstairs looks like a storage locker. We said it would be temporary. It has been 2 years. That last word hung longer. 2 years. People will edit the truth to fit the story they want to tell, but time is stubborn. It leaves marks that do not rub out. We could make real money on that room," Clara continued. "If she moved into a facility, or if she just moved, we could rent downstairs to a student or an engineer. They would pay on time. They would not leave teacups." Evan sighed. His voice softened in the way it does when he wants to be forgiven before he sins. "I will talk to her again," he said. "She will go. She has to." I put my pen down. I had no intention of arguing anymore. I had done my arguing, once, in courts that only exist inside the heart. You plead for the people you love until you realize you have made a habit of pleading. Then you stop. Silence is not surrender when it is the result of a decision. The house made an afternoon sound. You know it if you have lived inside walls long enough. The light shifts. The thermostat clicks. The refrigerator hum drops a notch. It is the hour when people begin to wonder what they will be for each other in the evening. I stood and smoothed the blanket on my bed. I opened the closet and moved the old coat that still smelled like end of winter. My palm slid along the back panel until I felt the rough edge of tape. I eased it up. The small key was right where I had left it years ago, when this house felt like promise, and I believed you could secure safety by hiding it somewhere you loved. I held the key in my hand and listened for footsteps. None came. I closed my fingers and let the metal warm against my skin. It was a small thing to look at. It did not look like power. Power rarely does. It looks like patience. I tucked the key in the pocket of my cardigan and closed the closet softly. The room was steady again. I sat. I breathed. I watched a square of light carve itself across the floor and climb the wall like a quiet ladder. When it reached the ceiling, I stood and made tea. Toward evening, Evan called down the stairs that dinner was ready. His voice tried to be bright. I went up. We ate spaghetti at the table I had bought on sale 10 years ago, when we were all still fond of each other. The children told me about the science fair. Clara reminded everyone not to spill. Evan asked about my day without using my name. I answered kindly, because kindness helps me sleep. I made the salad disappear one bite at a time. I laughed when the youngest made a joke that did not make sense. I wiped a bit of sauce from the corner of his mouth with the corner of my napkin. That was a tenderness I did not owe and still offered. Afterward, I washed the dishes while they started a movie. I stacked the plates so the sound would not travel. The dog lay at my feet and thumped its tail against a cupboard. I dried my hands and leaned on the counter and let the soft of the room fill my ribs. Then I went downstairs, sat on the edge of my bed, and took the key from my pocket. I set it in my palm and watched it glow a little in the lamplight. It was not a plan yet. It was an idea with edges. Ideas with edges can cut the things that hold you. I put the key back and closed my eyes. The house settled. Somewhere above me, laughter rose and began to fray. I slept in pieces and woke in whole numbers. Morning would come. It always does. The question had stopped being whether I could leave. The question had become how I would. Outside, a wind picked up. It rubbed its hands together in the maple leaves. The sound was the soft kind of promise, the kind that says soon without saying when. I turned on my side and let the quiet collect around me. When I breathed, I could feel the shape of the decision take up a little more room inside my chest. I did not push it away. I made space. The last thing I remember before sleep was the thin ribbon of light from the hallway under my door. It looked like the blade of a slow clock. It was not counting the moments left in this house. It was counting the moments the house had left in me. I slept. Morning began with rain. It tapped softly at the small window and smudged the view into a gentle watercolor. I have always liked rain. It dresses the ordinary in a veil and makes even ugly things look like they might be worth forgiving. I made tea and oatmeal and split a banana with the dog. He took it from my fingers with careful teeth and sat like a gentleman afterward, pleased with himself. I patted his head and felt the old ache in my wrist. Hands keep the score of a life. They remember every bed tucked, every tub scrubbed, every patient lifted, every child carried when the child was too tired to be carried. When I stepped into the hall, Clara was already at the bottom of the stairs. She had her purse on her shoulder and a jacket draped over her arm. She startled when she saw me, and then recovered in a way that suggested she was used to performing poise at short notice. "We need to talk," she said. "All right," I answered. She moved into the laundry space and looked around as if seeing it for the first time. "We cannot keep doing this," she said. "The bills are high. The space is cramped. The kids need quiet. We are under stress." She ticked each item off like a doctor, listing symptoms he had no intention of treating. I listened. I have always been good at that part. It used to help. Listening used to change outcomes. It still can, but only when both people are using the same language for truth. "I will not stay where I am not wanted," I said. My voice was even, a nurse voice, a court voice, a woman who knows the difference between compassion and permission. "Good," she said, as if I had finally agreed with her last and best idea. "Another thing," she added, "the pantry. Please buy what you eat and label what is yours so the children do not get confused." I almost laughed then, not from cruelty, but from the smallness of that request next to the largeness of the ones that had come before. She wanted the peanut butter to know its name while she erased mine. I nodded. She left. The door sighed in that old way. The dog snored softly on the mat. I stood a long time and felt my heart step over a line it had been towing for far too long. By noon, the rain had cleared. Light poured down the stairwell and turned the dust in the air to glitter. I opened the closet again. I slid the tape away. The key waited. I took it. There is a safe behind the old dresser. It is not clever or modern. It is the kind with a small metal face and a dial that remembers what your hand feels like when you are not afraid. I pulled the dresser with slow, firm movements until its feet scuffed a new set of commas in the dust. The safe watched me. I watched it back. Numbers are muscle memory if you have used them enough. I turned the dial the way you turn a story when you are trying to find the version in which you keep yourself. Right, left, right again. The lock drew in a small breath and released. I opened the door. Inside were folders, manila and plain, the color of things that have proven their worth by not being exciting. I touched them like you touch a shoulder at a funeral, with reverence, with recognition, with a sense that the body below your hand is not the whole of the person you loved, but it is still worthy of care. I lifted the first stack, the purchase agreement, my name steady as a rail, Leona Cross, the bank letters, the insurance, the transfer receipts, the invoices with my signature for the roof, for the HVAC, for the foundation, for the new water heater that never said thank you. Every page a small lantern. When you light enough of them, the dark stops pretending it owns the room. I laid the papers on the bed and sat with them. I did not cry. There are tears that wash you, and there are tears that drown you. I have learned the difference, and I refuse to drown today. The phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Evan. He wanted to know if I could pick up one of the children from practice. I could. I did. The girl climbed into the car and told me about a poster she was making for the planets. She said Jupiter wears a storm like a hat. I said I liked that image. She asked if I ever wanted to go to space. I told her I had already been. She asked when. I said it was every time I had to leave a life behind and breathe different air. She considered this in the serious way children sometimes consider the things you do not expect them to understand. Then she nodded and said, I think I know what you mean. We stopped for milk. The cashier called me dear. The parking lot smelled like wet asphalt and something fried. When we got home, Clara smiled at the child and told me to leave the groceries on the counter. Her smile did not reach her eyes. Mine did not need to. After dinner, I returned to the safe. I stacked what I needed and returned the rest. I shut the door and turned the dial, not because I was hiding anything, but because a ritual helps you hold the weight of what you are about to carry. I took out my notebook and made a new list. Not of money, not of repairs, of sentences. Each one simple and exact. I own this house. I have paid for this house. I have been a guest in a home I built. I am finished asking for a chair at a table I bought. The sentences looked back at me and did not flinch. I tore the page out and placed it with the documents. The dog placed his chin on my shoe and sighed like an old man who had finally let go of a story that never loved him. Later, when the kids were in bed and the adults were practicing whatever quiet their marriage had left, I brewed one more cup of tea. The steam rose in a long ribbon. I held it under my nose and let it warm the part of my face that does not smile as easily as it used to. The house was very still. I could hear the refrigerator click and the soft rush of the dishwasher filling. Water is patient. It will move around any shape to get where it is going. I stood and walked to the desk and took out my best pen. The ink caught the light. I began a letter. Not a plea, not an explanation. A letter that would sit on a table at breakfast and change the temperature of the air. I wrote the salutation and stopped. A voice above me rose, then fell. A door latched. The dog huffed. I looked down at the page again and wrote the first line with a hand that did not shake. Thank you for finally showing me who you are. I placed the pen beside the paper and laid my hand on the folder of documents. The skin over my knuckles is thin now, but the bones beneath are true. You can build bridges out of truth. You can also walk away on them. I slid everything into an envelope and pressed the flap until the glue held. Then I set it in the middle of the desk and laid my palm on it the way some people lay a palm on a child's back to remind them they are safe. The paper was cool. It would not be in the morning. Morning has heat. I cleaned the cup. I straightened the bed. I brushed my hair 100 times because my grandmother told me once that routine is a kind of prayer. When I turned out, the square of the small window, was a darker square in the dark. The rain had begun again. I lay down and closed my eyes and did not try to sleep. Sleep came anyway. It came like a tide. It reached my feet first, then my knees, then my chest. It was not mercy. It was the body choosing what it needed in order to finish something. Before I went under, I saw the key on the dresser where I had left it. It lay next to the old rosary and the tiny chipped saint that used to sit on my mother's windowsill. The three of them were a family of objects. I liked the way they watched the room without staring. Sometime in the deep of night I woke. The house had hushed itself into the kind of quiet that makes you think of snow. A single thought was in my mouth, like a word I had forgotten to say out loud. People forget. Paper remembers. I whispered it, and the room did not argue. Then I slept again. By morning, the rain had moved on and left a clean sky. The children laughed over cereal. The coffee machine gurgled. Footsteps moved across the ceiling. I sat up and swung my feet to the floor. The concrete no longer felt cold. It felt like the ground you push against when you stand. I dressed. I folded the blanket. I opened the door and stepped into the hall with the envelope in my hand. The light from upstairs poured down like a small waterfall. It made a bright path on the steps. I put my foot on the first one and climbed. At the landing, I paused and looked back down into the dim of the basement. The hum of the dryer spoke a gentle punctuation mark. I nodded at it, a small courtesy to a machine that had kept me company when people did not. Then I turned toward the kitchen. The table waited. The envelope waited. The morning waited. I placed the paper exactly in the center and smoothed it once with the flat of my palm. From outside the front door came the sound of a truck downshifting on the hill. A neighbor called to a dog. A bird tried out 2 notes and decided to keep them. In that moment, the house did not feel bigger than its walls anymore. It felt like a place with a door I knew how to use. I poured coffee. I set 3 cups, the way my hands have set cups for years. I cut a slice of banana bread from the loaf I had wrapped and hidden in the bread box last night. A small sweetness for a table that had forgotten it could host tenderness. I put the knife down. At the edge of my vision, the envelope was a quiet square. It did not glow. It did not shout. It simply existed. The most dangerous truths often do. Footsteps on the stairs, the soft squeal of a step that needs repair, a child's whisper. Then Evan's voice, rough with sleep. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I answered, and the word felt like exactly what it was. He moved toward the coffee and reached for the cups. His eyes found the envelope. They paused. He frowned the way people frown at a thing that asks them to read before breakfast. Clara came in behind him. She saw it too. "What is that?" she asked. I did not answer. I sipped my coffee. I looked at the window. Outside, the light was clear. The day had made up its mind. He slid a finger beneath the flap. Paper sighed. Things were about to change. That was not a promise. That was geometry. I held my cup in both hands and watched steam rise. Somewhere beneath my feet, the dryer clicked to a stop. The house took a breath, and in the soft breath before words returned to the room, I understood that a shadow cannot swallow a woman who has remembered where the switch is. The envelope lay open. The pages waited like witnesses. The key on my nightstand glinted in my mind. The folders in the safe rested easy again. The rain had washed the dust out of the morning. This is where the quiet ends, I thought. This is where the paper speaks. And then the first page turned. I always believed paper was patient. It waits. It does not defend itself or argue. It just stays where you left it until you finally remember to look. The morning after I wrote the letter, sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor like honey. Evan and Clara had already left for work, the children for school. The house was half alive, breathing in the slow rhythm of empty rooms. I poured myself coffee and sat at the table where the envelope had rested hours earlier. The space it left behind was small but powerful, like the imprint of something still warm. I sipped and listened to the refrigerator hum. The house was pretending nothing had happened. Houses are good at that. They learn denial from the people who live in them. Downstairs, the washer began its cycle. I followed the sound, not because I needed to, but because the motion steadied me. The smell of soap greeted me like an old coworker, dependable, a little weary. I folded the towels Clara had left half done, smoothing each edge with deliberate care. Order is a way to remind chaos. It does not get the final word. When I finished, I knelt beside the dresser again. The safe hid behind it, squat and silent. I touched the dial, the cold metal familiar under my fingertips. My husband's voice came back to me, not as sound but as memory. "Keep the originals, Leona. People forget. Paper remembers." I turned the dial. Right, left, right again. The click landed soft as a heartbeat. The door opened. Inside, Everything waited exactly as it had, years ago: folders, envelopes, even the small velvet pouch where I'd kept the key before I learned to tape it behind the closet. I pulled the first folder and opened it on my lap. There was the purchase contract, my name printed clearly, neat and certain. The lawyer's signature below it, the notary's stamp catching the light like a quiet medal. Behind it, receipts for the down payment, checks written from my pension fund, monthly statements showing payments drawn from my account, a lifetime measured in ink. I ran my fingers over the paper. Every crease, every smudge carried proof of something I'd built while everyone else was asleep. There were records for the roof repair, for the heater, for the car I'd sold to pay for both. Even the property tax letters were still addressed to me. For years I had treated these papers as relics, pieces of a life that no longer belonged to me. But now they were something else, a spine, holding me upright. I stacked them carefully, made notes in my notebook, copied key dates. The act of writing steadied my breath. At the hospital, I used to record every vital sign, every dosage, every minute. You learn early that details save lives. When I looked up, the room seemed brighter, as if even the air recognized that I had remembered myself. I closed the safe, but didn't push the dresser back all the way. Some doors deserve to stay half open. By afternoon, the phone rang. The number flashed familiar but distant. Morrison Kane Law Office. I hadn't heard that name since my husband's will. My heart beat once, solid, then evened out. "Mrs. Cross," the voice said warmly, "this is Roger Kane. How are you holding up?" "I'm still here," I answered. He chuckled softly. "Good to hear. I looked over the documents you emailed. Everything checks out. The property deed lists you as the sole owner. There's no secondary party, no liens, no shared title. Whatever they think, it's still yours." I let the words settle. They felt heavier than I expected. "You have every right," he continued. "If you'd like, I can prepare a formal notice to vacate. 30 days is standard, but you can choose less." I thought about the faces upstairs, the children's laughter, the sound of Clara's heels crossing the hardwood. 30 days felt merciful. Mercy is a habit that's hard to unlearn. "Make it 48 hours, I said quietly. He hesitated. "That's brief." So was their kindness. He exhaled. "Understood. I'll draft it today. I'll email you for a signature." After we hung up, I sat for a long while with my hands flat on the table. The skin there is thin now, but the veins still run strong. You can tell a nurse by her hands steady, even when the heart isn't. I opened my laptop, the old one with the cracked corner, and signed the document when it arrived. My name looked calm beside the legal seal. When I clicked send, the sound was almost nothing, a soft note in an ordinary room, but I felt it like thunder. That evening, I cooked dinner as usual. Spaghetti again. Familiarity keeps suspicion away. Evan complimented the sauce without realizing it tasted of endings. Clara smiled thinly and poured wine. The children chattered about school projects. I nodded and laughed in the right places. Every gesture was muscle memory. Afterward, I washed dishes, humming quietly. When the last plate was dry, I turned off the lights and stood in the dark kitchen. The moon hung pale through the window, resting its glow on the papers folded in my apron pocket. Tomorrow, I thought, tomorrow they will finally read the truth. I climbed the stairs softly, feeling each step like a heartbeat. The house woke before I did. I could hear footsteps above me, the low murmur of voices, a chair scraping. I dressed slowly, smoothed my collar, and tied my shoes. Today required calm hands. When I reached the kitchen, the morning smelled of coffee and something burnt. Evan was pacing near the sink, his phone to his ear. Clara stood at the table, holding the letter. Her eyes flicked up. "What is this?" The calm I'd practiced all night slipped on like a glove. "A notice," I said. "You should read it." Evan hung up and stared at me. "You can't be serious." "I am," I said. "My lawyer can explain the rest." He tore through the first page, then the second. His eyes darted, scanning for loopholes that didn't exist. "This is insane," he said finally. "You can't just evict us." "I'm not evicting," I corrected. "I'm reclaiming." The room went still. Even the coffee machine seemed to hold its breath. Clara's voice trembled on the edge between fury and disbelief. "We helped you. We let you live here." I looked at her and felt an old ache turn into something cleaner. No, I said softly. I let you live here. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Evan's face shifted through emotions too quick to name shock, anger, the small sting of understanding. He dropped the pages onto the table. The sound was sharp enough to startle the dog. What are we supposed to do? He asked. Find another home, I said. You wouldn't. I already did. He stared at me as if seeing a stranger. In a way, he was. The woman standing in front of him was not the one who had folded his shirts and paid his debts. She was older, smaller, but she was built from the same steel that had once kept entire wards running through the night. Clara turned away, muttering about lawyers and fairness. I didn't answer. Arguments are a luxury of people who haven't already decided. I left the envelope on the table where they could reach it easily. Then I poured coffee into my cup, steady as ritual, and took a sip. The taste was bitter but clean. Outside, the sky was white with sunlight. A neighbor's sprinkler hissed. Somewhere a child laughed. The world, unbothered, kept turning. By midday, I had packed my suitcase clothes, photographs, a jar of honey, the framed picture of my husband on our wedding day. I placed the documents in a folder inside the outer pocket. I looked around the room one last time. The shadows leaned softly against the furniture, unaccusing. When I walked down the hall, I passed the family photos Clara had arranged on the wall. My face had been cropped from most of them. I smiled at the precision of her editing. History always tells the story of whoever holds the scissors. At the door, I paused, listening. From the kitchen came the sound of Evan's voice, low, pleading now. Clara's tone was sharp, full of panic. The words blurred into each other, but the meaning was clear. They were finally talking to each other instead of over me. That was something. I stepped outside. The morning light wrapped around me like a warm shawl. The sky smelled of grass and distance. May's car pulled into the driveway, a gentle silver sedan with a dented fender. She stepped out and waved. Her smile carried the kind of kindness that doesn't need an apology first. Ready? She asked. I nodded. Yes, ready. She took my suitcase and set it in the trunk. I turned back toward the house. Through the window, I could see Clara at the table, head in her hands. Evan stood beside her, staring at the papers. I felt no triumph, only release. Goodbye, I whispered, not to them, but to the silence that had lived here with me. As the car rolled down the street, I watched the house shrink in the side mirror until it was only a blur of color. For a heartbeat, I almost reached for the seatbelt buckle, as if to turn back, but then the air changed the smell of rain, the hum of May's soft humming, and I realized that leaving doesn't always mean losing. Sometimes it means breathing in a room where no one interrupts your name. I leaned my head against the window and closed my eyes. The road curved, steady and kind. May's voice filled the quiet. I made sweet tea, she said. It's waiting. I smiled. Then I guess I'm home. The reflection in the glass showed a woman older than memory, but lighter than grief. The kind of woman paper remembers because it was signed with her name. May's house smelled of citrus and old paper, the kind of scent that tells you you're somewhere safe. She lived by the lake, in a cottage painted the color of faded mint, with shutters that creaked when the wind moved through the trees. When I stepped inside, the air felt still, as if it knew to give me space before asking questions. Take the guest room, she said. It's small, but it has sunlight in the morning. She carried my suitcase down the hallway before I could argue. The floorboards complained in soft rhythm under her slippers. I stood in the doorway for a moment after she left. The room was tidy. One window, one dresser, a quilt folded neatly on the bed. Outside, the lake glimmered like a coin tossed for luck. I exhaled and let the stillness reach the corners of me that had forgotten how to breathe. Later that afternoon, we sat on her porch with 2 mugs of tea. May was the kind of friend who asked questions without forcing you to answer them. She looked out at the water, not at me. So, she said, you finally did it. I did. Her mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. About time. I laughed softly. You make it sound simple. Simple and easy are not the same thing, she said. You've always known that. We watched the ripples crawl toward the shore. A heron lifted from the reeds, its wings slicing through the quiet. For a long while we didn't speak. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was kind. When I went back inside, the clock above her stove read 3 in the afternoon. I opened my suitcase and began to unpack. Each folded shirt carried the faint smell of detergent and endings. I lined my shoes neatly under the bed, then opened the folder that held my documents. The crisp edges comforted me. They were proof of something that had outlasted doubt. At dusk, I called Roger, the lawyer. His voice came through steady, the background hum of an office printer behind him. "They've received the notice," he said. 48 hours means by tomorrow evening they must vacate. You've done everything correctly." "Thank you." He hesitated. "Are you certain you want to go through with it? They're your family." "They were," I said. "For a long time." He didn't argue. "If they contest it, the law is clear. You're within your rights. Do you want me to check in after tomorrow?" "Yes, but I don't think they'll fight. They'll just hate quietly." He sighed, a sound full of tired understanding. Quiet hate never wins. After the call, I sat by the window. Across the lake, the lights of other houses blinked like distant thoughts. The sky was bruised purple, the color of confession. I thought of Evan, of the boy who once clutched my hand when thunder rolled. I wondered if he still remembered that storm, the one where we hid in the bathtub, counting seconds between flash and sound. He had laughed then, saying the world was just practicing how to scare people. He hadn't learned that sometimes people become storms themselves. I closed the curtains and lay down. The quilt smelled faintly of lavender. Sleep came slowly, but without pain. In the morning, May handed me toast and orange marmalade. Her kitchen windows glowed with sunlight, filtered through lace curtains. "You look lighter," she said. "I feel untethered." "That's not a bad thing," she said. "Kites are untethered too, but they still rise." I smiled, and for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like work. By midday, the phone began to ring again. 3 missed calls from Evan, 1 from Clara, no voicemail, just silence. I let them stack like unread letters. May glanced over but didn't comment. She simply poured more tea. "They'll come here," I said. "Let them," she replied. Outside, wind moved across the lake, shivering the surface into silver threads. The world felt clean, like rain before it falls. I spent the afternoon in the garden, helping May trim her roses. Thorns caught my gloves but didn't pierce. It felt good to work with something that drew blood honestly. When I came back inside, another message waited. This one from Evan, voice small, almost childlike. "Mom, please call me. We need to talk. Clara's upset. The kids don't understand. Please." I replayed it twice. The words sounded like footsteps on a bridge I had already burned. I didn't delete it, but I didn't call back either. Some bridges are meant to glow behind you, not lead you home. At sunset, a car engine rolled into the driveway. May looked through the curtain. "That your boy?" I nodded. He stepped out slowly, shoulders slumped, tie loose. The same boy who once wore superhero capes now looked like a man undone by paperwork. He knocked once. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. Behind him, the lake threw back the last gold of the sun. "Mom," he said, voice rough, "we need to fix this." "There's nothing to fix, Evan. There's only what's fair. You can't throw your own family out." "I didn't," I said. "I only asked them to leave my house." He rubbed his face, tired. "Do you even hear yourself? You sound cold." "I sound calm," I said. "You've just forgotten the difference." He looked past me into May's hallway, as if expecting to find the woman he remembered. "She's gone," I said quietly. "You buried her with your kindness." He winced. "Clara didn't mean—" "She meant every word she said," I interrupted, "and so did you." He stepped back, shaking his head. "You're punishing us." I wanted to tell him, punishment implies anger, but what I felt was closer to math balance, equations restored. Instead, I said, "You'll understand someday, when something you built starts calling you a burden." For a second, the man vanished, and the boy I once knew flickered there wet-eyed, frightened of losing what he thought would last forever. He opened his mouth, but May's voice came from behind me, firm and steady. "You should go now, Evan. This is not your home anymore." He hesitated, then nodded slowly. When he turned, the wind caught the edge of his jacket. He walked to the car without looking back. I closed the door. The latch clicked like a period at the end of a long sentence. May set a hand on my shoulder. "You did right." "I know," I said, and meant it. That night, the storm finally came. Rain hammered the roof. Thunder stitched itself across the sky. The sound should have frightened me. but it only made my heart beat steady. Each flash of lightning illuminated the lake in shards of white. I stood by the window, watching the water dance. I thought of all the years I'd mistaken silence for peace. Peace doesn't hide, it arrives loud, with thunder and rain and the courage to start again. When I finally lay down, I left the window open. Cool air washed over me, smelling of wet earth and change. Somewhere between the storm's growl and the whisper of trees, I heard my husband's voice again, low and certain. "You kept the records, Leona," it said. "That's how you survive." I smiled into the dark. "I know," I whispered. The thunder rolled once more, softer this time, like applause fading into distance. Sleep came easy. Tomorrow, the 48 hours would end. Tomorrow, justice would have a face. I woke before the light had decided what kind of day it wanted to be. The lake at May's window was the color of tin, ripples stitched tight by a thin wind. I dressed without hurry, folded the quilt, and stood for a moment with my hands on the sill. 48 hours can pass like weather, soft from a distance, violent when it arrives. Today, the hours were done. May was already in the kitchen, the kettle beginning to sing. "You will eat first," she said, "because steady blood makes a steady voice." I smiled and took the toast. My hands were calm. It is a relief to meet yourself again and find that you have not forgotten how to be brave. We drove in the quiet blue part of morning. The road curved like a sentence that knows exactly where its period lives. When we reached the house, the street was still yawning itself awake. A jogger passed, a sprinkler clicked its way across a lawn. My old porch looked back at me with the same surprised expression it had the day I first put a potted fern beside the door. May parked and rested her hand on the wheel. "I will wait here unless you ask for me," she said. "Thank you," I answered. "For everything." She shook her head. "You have been everything for yourself. I am only the witness." The key fit the lock, the way a word fits the mouth that owns it. Inside, the kitchen smelled like coffee left too long on a burner. The counters were cluttered with the kind of clutter that belongs to people who have not learned to live with consequence. I set my bag on a chair and opened the pantry. Flour, sugar, bananas that had gone spotty with ripeness. Good. Some things still knew how to be ready when called upon. I moved the way I learned to move in operating rooms. Small, exact motions that make calm look easy. The oven clicked on, butter softened in a bowl. Sugar joined and turned pale under the wooden spoon. Eggs broke open with a neat crack, surrendered their gold to the work. The scent rose as the batter took the memory of warmth. While the bread baked, I wiped the table, slow circles, edge to edge. I set 3 cups in a neat row, then a 4th in case Clara wanted to pretend we were a family again. I took the envelope from my bag, not the notice. That part had already done its work. This one was thinner. It held a list of their options collected by Roger. Numbers for shelters and short-term rentals, a card for a credit counselor who owed me a favor, and a sheet that said what everyone forgets when the world feels cruel. It said, "Breathe." Upstairs, a door opened. Steps shuffled. A child's voice rose, sleepy and bright. I closed my eyes at the sound, not to hide from it, but to honor the small miracle that innocence keeps happening even where kindness has failed. The oven timer blinked into the quiet. I pulled the loaf and set it on a rack. The smell was a childhood, sweet and patient. I cut a slice and let steam rise into the morning air. I poured coffee. I placed everything in the center, like an altar for a family that had once known how to kneel at the right things. Evan came down first. He stopped at the last step, as if the room had shifted while he slept. The sight of me at the table did that to him. It would have done that to anyone who had forgotten she belonged to every room her name had paid for. "Morning," he said, and the word sounded like a door that had forgotten whether it should close or open. "Morning," I answered. "Sit, eat." He moved like he was waiting to be told no. I cut him a slice. He took it, then put it down untouched. "You cannot expect us to disappear in a day," he said. "We have children, we have work, we have lives." "I know," I said. "That is why I brought this." I slid the thin envelope toward him. "I also brought the receipts you asked the world to forget, but you do not need those now. You only need to pack." Clara entered then, eyes already sharp. "You cannot keep doing this performance," she said. "People will find out what you did. People will judge." "They will," I said, and they will be right to judge a woman who finally told the truth to a house." She laughed, a small, unpleasant sound. "You think you are a hero because you signed a few papers." "No," I said gently. "I think I am a woman who refuses to live in a basement you call a favor." She moved to the counter and gripped the edge as if it could steady the version of herself she preferred. The older child came in, looked at us, then at the bread, then reached for a slice with the reckless honesty reserved for the young. Clara took it from his hand. "Not yet," she said. The boy stepped back, eyes wide, not at the rule, but at the way it was delivered. Evan skimmed the list I had given him. His face changed as he recognized the careful kindness hiding behind the firm edges. "I do not want your help," he said. "Then call it help for the children and let your pride swallow it," I answered. He looked at me, mouth working around arguments that no longer had air to live in. The clock on the wall marked out the minutes that were not theirs anymore. The sound of it felt like justice counting softly to itself. The knock came just after 8. Clear, professional, courteous the way authority can be when it has no doubt. Evan flinched. Clara set her jaw. I answered the door. 2 deputies stood on the porch. Their hats were modest, their hands empty and visible. "Mrs. Cross," the taller one said, "we are here to post the final notice and to ensure that the transfer of possession proceeds without incident." "Thank you," I said. "The coffee is fresh if you need to warm your morning." He almost smiled. "We are fine, Mom." They stepped inside, and everything in the house became honest. Sunlight brightened the floorboards. The dust that had been pretending not to exist showed itself in a polite haze. Evan stood behind the table, a man without a script. Clara folded her arms and stared past everyone toward the life she believed the world owed her. The deputy explained the steps in a voice that had carried these steps through many rooms. A posting on the door, a documented inventory of what belonged to whom, a civilized hour for departure, a suggestion, not a requirement, that dignity travels best when anger is left behind. Clara snapped that she would not be treated like a criminal. "You are not being treated like one," he said mildly. "You are being treated like a person who is moving. That is less dramatic and more useful." The child, who had nearly earned a slice of bread, tugged at my sleeve. "Can I have some now?" he whispered. "Yes," I said. "You can have 2. Tell your brother I said the same." He smiled with his whole face, and the morning grew a little kinder. May appeared in the doorway then, a quiet figure with steady eyes. She had not needed my call. She had only needed her sense that already knows where she belongs when someone she loves is doing a hard thing. She stood near the sideboard and nodded once, the kind of nod that means, "Go on, you are not alone." I took the ring of keys from my bag. 2 for the front, 1 for the back door, 1 for the garage, one that had never managed to remember what it opened. I placed them on the table in front of the deputy. He wrote the time on a form and asked me to sign. Paper slid under my hand like a small river. The pen left a clean black line. My name looked like it had been waiting for this very sentence. Clara turned away, muttering a prayer for rescue. I did not correct her. Anyone can pray. But not everyone listens to the answer that already lives inside the facts. The deputy finished the posting and handed a copy to Evan. "By noon, sir," he said, and the word "sir" turned the moment into something that could be borne. When the officers stepped back onto the porch, the kitchen exhaled. The banana bread cooled. The coffee smelled like the kind you brew for strangers who might someday be friends. I looked at my son, he looked at the floor. We stood on opposite sides of a life we had built together, and maybe that is what made the room feel larger than it used to. "You have until noon," I said. "I will not be here to watch you pack. That would be unkind for everyone. Leave the keys on the counter. Take your memories and your dignity. If you cannot carry both, choose dignity." He nodded once. It was not agreement. It was the body choosing obedience, because it finally recognized a boundary with a spine. I picked up my bag and turned to May. "Ready," I said. "Ready," she answered. At the door, I paused and looked back. The table was set, 3 cups and a 4th, a loaf of bread that smelled like forgiveness, even though it was not. The children were whispering to each other about planets and storms. The dog had settled by the oven, with the satisfied patience of creatures who understand how to wait for the right heat. "Goodbye," I said to no one, and to everything, and stepped into the light. We did not go far. May drove us to the park at the end of the street, where a line of maples made a green tunnel for the morning. We sat on a bench and watched a pair of teenagers teach a younger boy how to throw a ball without flinching. The smaller boy kept closing his eyes at the last second, each time he opened them, and laughed anyway. There is a lesson in that, and I let it sit beside me like an old friend. My phone buzzed on the hour. A message from Roger confirming that the posting had been recorded. A note from a neighbor who had seen the officers and wanted to know if I was all right. I wrote back that I was more than all right. I was done. May passed me a paper cup of tea she had somehow produced from a thermos I had not seen her bring. "People forget," she said. "Eyes on the trees." "Paper remembers," I answered. "And so do friends," she said. "And so do women like us," I added, "the ones who kept the lights on when the world decided to blink." We walked the loop along the edge of the field. Birds threw their small opinions into the air. A breeze arrived with the smell of cut grass and someone's early lunch. At 11, I checked my watch and then put my wrist down. Waiting inside a clock is a bad way to spend the one life you get. We returned to the house at 12:15. The street had lost its hush. Delivery trucks hummed. The dog across the way made a half-hearted announcement and lay down again. On my door hung the yellow copy of the posting, official and almost cheerful in its certainty. The keys were on the counter where I had asked them to be. The kitchen was tidy in the way a room tries to be polite after strangers have left a party early. On the table someone had placed a note. The handwriting was Evan's from a long time ago, the same hand that once labeled school notebooks and holiday cards with too many exclamation points. "We are sorry," the note read, and under it were the names, each one written like a question. I did not answer on paper. I let the quiet be my reply. Some apologies need a long hallway of time before they can arrive at the door with the right posture. I moved through the rooms the way you move through a museum after the lights come on. The couch sagged where it always had. The curtains still hung level because I had measured twice before I hammered. In the bedroom, someone had left a candle on the dresser, unused. I picked it up and smelled vanilla and something that wanted to be coconut. I set it down. The house did not need another disguise. In the small room that had been mine, the washer blinked a final green eye and went dark. The mattress was stripped. The dresser was lighter than before, as if it had shrugged off the stories it had been forced to carry. I opened the safe for the last time, not because I needed anything from it, but because I wanted to say thank you to an object that had done what people would not. I placed my palm on the metal and let the cool hold me a moment. Then I turned the dial to closed and pushed the dresser back where it belonged. At the kitchen door, May stood with a grocery sack. She had brought lemons and a bouquet of the kind of flowers that looked like the sun had decided to grow on stems. "For your table," she said. "For your first meal home." We cooked in the quiet together. Broth simmered. Bread warmed again and softened like mornings do when you forgive them their early hour. When we ate, the fork was honest in my hand. Food tastes different in a room that does not judge you for needing it. After lunch, Roger called to say the transfer had finalized. He asked if I wanted him to swing by with a notary for a set of documents I had requested earlier in the week. "Bring them," I said. "Bring a pen you like." He arrived with a man who smelled faintly of aftershave and ink. We sat at the table where so many versions of me had lived and died, and signed our names in the right places. The notary stamped each page with a small, firm sound. When we were done, Roger folded the stack and placed it neatly in a long envelope. "This last part," he said, "is the listing agreement. The agent can meet you tomorrow. There is already interest from a buyer I think you will like. She is a postal worker with 2 kids and a credit report that tells a story of hard work and no shortcuts. Tell her I will bake bread on signing day," I said. He smiled in a way that allowed his eyes to be kind. "I will," he said. When they left, the afternoon had turned brilliant. The maple leaves made moving coins of light along the floor. I opened the windows and let the house listen to the world it lives in. Sound came in like company, a lawn mower 2 yards over, a radio playing a song I used to sing along to when my hair was darker and my feet did not need sensible shoes. Someone calling out that dinner would be late. Life, ordinary but exact. I took a pad from the drawer and made a list. Not of chores, not of money, not of people to forgive. I wrote the rooms I wanted to clean first. I wrote the names of the women at the center where I wanted to volunteer again. I wrote tomatoes, because a garden looks like hope, even when it is only soil and intention. When evening came, I brewed tea and sat at the table with the window open. The temperature slipped down a few degrees, and the house settled around the decision it had been given. My phone buzzed once, a message from Evan. He wrote only 2 words. "Thank you." I did not reply. I folded the phone shut and placed it face down. Gratitude is a beginning, not a conclusion. I wanted those words to walk a long road inside him before they tried knocking at my door again. May washed the last cup and set it to dry. She stood with her back to me and looked out at the porch as if the night itself were a person arriving without its shoes. "Do you hear that?" she asked. I listened. "What?" I said. "Nothing," she answered, and smiled. "It is the sound of nothing hanging heavy. It means a house has learned to be quiet without making you small." I leaned back and let my shoulders feel their own weight. The ceiling held them without complaint. In the middle of the table sat the ring of keys. I turned one between my fingers. It clicked against the others, a small music that reminded me of bracelets in younger kitchens. "You kept yourself," May said, and there was no envy in it, only truth. I nodded. I thought of the girl at the center who needed a title search, of the neighbor who always watched from her window because she had no one to sit with her on her porch, of the postal worker who might bring her children to this room and teach them how to measure flour with a gentle hand. I ate one more slice of bread. The crust cracked the way a good decision cracks, with a sound you want to hear again. I closed my eyes and tasted banana and sugar, and the memory of a boy who used to clap at simple sweetness. I let the memory be sweet, without sharpening it on what came later. The sky outside turned violet. A breeze lifted the curtain and laid it down again. I put the keys in a small bowl near the door. "This is mine," I thought, and the words felt balanced, not greedy. Before bed, I wrote a sentence on a clean page and left the notebook open on the counter. "I did not win," I wrote. I returned. I turned off the lights and walked down the hall. The floor did not creak like a complaint anymore. It sounded like a house meeting a woman in the middle of her life and deciding to hold her up. I slept in my own room under my own roof and dreamed nothing at all. The morning would bring new paperwork and a new name on a new deed. The story would bend again, gently this time, but that was tomorrow. Tonight belonged to the ordinary miracle that my name and my keys and my kitchen had learned to live in the same sentence again. And somewhere far from here a motel lamp clicked off, and a man I once carried with both my arms turned on his side and stared at a ceiling that did not know his name. I did not hate him. A ceiling is only a ceiling. A lesson is only a lesson when you stop trying to sleep through it. I closed my eyes. The house breathed with me. The dark was kind. The quiet had learned my shape. I rested inside both. "Tomorrow," I whispered, and it sounded like gratitude. The house was silent when the buyer came to see it. Her name was Mara Jennings, a postal worker from town. She stood on the porch, wiping her hands on her jeans, eyes wide as if the place might vanish if she stared too long. "You're really selling?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "It's ready for someone new." She stepped inside carefully, almost reverently, like a person entering a chapel. The children who had once run through these rooms were gone. Their voices had left only an echo, thin, familiar, forgiving. "I've walked past this house every morning for years," she said softly. "I always thought it looked like it was waiting for someone to love it." I smiled. "Then it's been waiting for you." While she wandered through the kitchen, I watched her touch the banister, the windowsill, the curve of the door frame. Her fingers moved the way mine once did, when I believed everything I touched could be saved. When she left, the agent turned to me. "She's the kind of buyer we hope for," he said. "Single mother, 2 boys, works hard, you'll like her." I already did. That evening, I sat on the back steps as the sun folded itself behind the lake. May brought 2 cups of tea and handed me one without speaking. The steam rose between us like a prayer we'd said too many times to still need words. "How does it feel?" she asked finally. "Like I just finished a long shift," I said, "tired but clean." We watched the light slip down the water. Somewhere in the distance, thunder murmured its slow approach. Later that night, the phone rang again. It was Evan. His voice was thinner than I remembered, softer. "Mom?" "Yes." "We moved into a motel near the highway. It's not ideal." "No," I said quietly. "It wouldn't be." There was a long pause. Then, "The kids miss you." I closed my eyes. "I miss them too. Clara wants to talk to you." I don't think that's a good idea. He sighed. She doesn't understand. She does, I said. She just doesn't like the ending. He hesitated. You could have told me. About the papers, the deed. You could have remembered, I said gently. You were there when I signed them. Another silence. Then, in a voice so small I almost missed it, he said, Are you happy now? No, I answered honestly, but I'm free. Happiness comes after that. When we hung up, I sat for a long time listening to the rain starting against the roof. Every drop sounded like punctuation, tiny periods marking the end of sentences we'd spent years pretending were paragraphs. I poured myself another cup of tea and opened my notebook. At the top of a clean page, I wrote, Freedom begins when silence learns to speak. The words looked fragile but true. I left them there, uncrossed, unfinished. By morning, the storm had passed. The lake shimmered under a silver sky. Mara arrived with her boys to sign the final papers. They brought a tin of cookies, tied with red ribbon. For luck, she said. I laughed. Luck is good. But make sure you keep your documents, too. The younger boy peeked at me from behind his mother's coat. Do you really live here? He asked. Not anymore, I said. But I did, for a very long time. He nodded solemnly, as though I'd told him a story he wasn't old enough to understand, but would someday remember anyway. The signing was brief. Pens moved, pages turned, signatures bloomed. When it was done, the agent handed me a copy of the contract. All official, he said. I folded it carefully, slid it into my bag, and stood. Mara's eyes glistened. Thank you for trusting me. It's your turn now, I said. Take care of it. Houses remember kindness. When they drove away, I stayed on the porch. The empty street hummed with the sound of insects and faraway cars. I felt no grief, no victory, only a balance that the air itself seemed to understand. Later, May and I sat at her kitchen table. She was knitting a scarf, the color of fog. What will you do now? She asked. I'll start the workshop, I said. The one for women who don't know where to begin again. She looked up, eyes bright. You mean the thing you used to talk about in the hospital cafeteria 20 years ago? Yes, I said. Except now I know what it's for. We spent the afternoon writing flyers. Legal basics for widows and retirees. How to keep what's yours. How to leave when you're ready. By evening, the printer was warm with pages. The house smelled like ink and lavender tea. That night, I took a walk by the lake. The air was cold enough to taste. The moon dragged a silver road across the water. For a moment, I thought I saw my husband sitting by the shore, shoulders straight, the way he used to wait for me after a late shift. When I blinked, he was gone, but the feeling stayed the same. Steady patience I'd carried through every long night on the ward, every birth, every death, every meal eaten standing up. I stopped near the reeds and looked back at the cottage. A single light glowed from the porch. I thought of the boy in Mara's car, his wide eyes, the future unspooling in front of him. I hoped the house would be kind to him. My phone buzzed. Another message from Evan. Mom, thank you for the card. The kids keep asking about you. When things settle, can we visit? I read it twice. My first instinct was to guard my peace. But peace that can't open the door a little isn't peace, it's a cell. Yes, I typed back. When the lake freezes, it was far enough away for all of us to thaw first. I slipped the phone into my pocket and looked up. Stars were beginning to pierce the sky, patient and exact. People forget, I whispered again, but the heart remembers too. Then, I turned toward home. Spring arrived quietly, as if it was shy to find me already awake. The lake thawed first, a thin silver line cutting through the ice, widening each day until water could breathe again. I stood at the edge in my old coat, the one with pockets deep enough for memories and seeds. May's cottage had become my home, in every sense that word can mean, without walls claiming ownership. She still teased me for organizing her pantry alphabetically. I teased her for knitting too many scarves. Between us, the days found their rhythm. Tea in the morning, work in the garden after lunch, phone calls from women who needed a kind of help you couldn't find printed on brochures. It started with one neighbor, a widow named Ruth, who was afraid her son might sell her apartment while she was in the hospital. She came to us with trembling hands and a plastic bag full of receipts. Can you look at these? She asked. I think they matter. They did. Everything matters when it bears your name. I spread the papers across the table and showed her how to organize them. Bank statements, utility bills, tax slips. We labeled each folder with care. I watched the fear leave her shoulders 1 inch at a time. The next week, Ruth brought another woman, then another. Soon the living room was full on Thursdays, women with stories that echoed mine in strange harmonies. Lost pensions, children who stopped calling, signatures they didn't remember giving. I made a sign for the door that said Community Workshop, the Garden of Justice. May laughed when she saw it. "You've gone poetic again," she said. "Gardens grow what we tend," I replied. "So will this." We planted tomatoes and herbs in the yard that same afternoon. Each woman left with soil under her nails and a folder of documents labeled in her own handwriting. It felt holy, in a humble way. Sometimes I'd see Mara's boys ride their bikes past the gate. They always waved, shouting, "Hi, Miss Leona," and I'd wave back, pretending not to notice how tall they were getting. The house behind them looked alive, curtains open, flowers on the porch, laughter tumbling through windows that had once been sealed with silence. One evening, as I watered the basil, a familiar car slowed by the curb. Evan stepped out, older in a way that had nothing to do with time. He carried no excuses this time, only a small paper bag. "I brought the kids," he said, "if it's all right." May appeared at the door, reading the moment perfectly. "It's all right," she said. "Tea's on." The children ran toward me. The girl hugged my waist before I could speak. "Dad says this is where heroes live," she said. I laughed softly. "Heroes just keep lists, sweetheart, that's all." Evan handed me the bag. Inside was banana bread, a little burnt at the edges. "She wanted to bake it herself," he said, nodding at his daughter. I supervised. I took a bite. It tasted like forgiveness still finding its shape. He looked around the garden, the rows of green, the circle of chairs, the women chatting under the tree. "You built something here," he said. "I rebuilt," I corrected. "There's a difference." He nodded. "You look happy." "I am," I said. And it was true, but not the brittle kind of happiness that can shatter when someone raises their voice. It was the deep, quiet version that grows roots. The kids chased each other along the fence, while Evan helped May carry trays of tea. I watched them, the way light fell across their faces, the ease with which laughter found its place again. Later, as the sun slipped behind the trees, Evan stood beside me. "I still don't understand how you forgave me," he said. I smiled at the garden. "I didn't," I said. "Forgiveness is for the past. What we have now is peace, and that belongs to the living." He was silent for a while. Then he said, "Peace looks good on you." "Better than fear," I said. We both laughed, and the sound startled a robin from the fence. It flew toward the lake, wings flashing bronze in the dying light. By summer, the workshops had outgrown May's cottage. We moved them to the old community hall downtown, the one that smelled faintly of chalk and dust, but had windows big enough to let the world in. We filled it every Thursday. Widows, grandmothers, single mothers, retired nurses, teachers who'd given everything but never kept copies of the receipts. I taught them what Roger had taught me: how to read a contract, how to file for joint ownership, how to keep a will where no one could quietly make it disappear. At the end of each session, we stood in a circle outside the hall, hands dirty from planting the small garden I'd started beside the steps. Tomatoes again, always tomatoes. When they grew red, we made sauce and jars and laughter. It was messy and human and alive. Reporters came once, asking if they could do a story about the retired nurse who evicted her son and started a justice garden. I said no at first. Then I said yes, on one condition: they could write about the women, not about me. When the article ran, donations arrived in envelopes, smelling of ink and good intentions. We used them to buy printers, notebooks, even a second-hand laptop for Ruth. Someone painted a sign above the hall door that said Grandma Justice Center. The name stuck. Evan visited sometimes with the children. They helped weed the garden, carried boxes, set out chairs. He never stayed long, but he always left quieter, lighter. I never asked where he lived now. Some answers don't need to be spoken to exist. One evening, when the hall was empty and the sun was slipping behind the roofline, I sat alone on the steps. My notebook lay open on my lap. I wrote slowly, letting the ink dry between words. I used to think love meant keeping the lights on, no matter how much it cost. Now I know it means turning them off when people start pretending the dark doesn't hurt. The wind lifted the page and turned it for me. On the next one I wrote, "People forget, paper remembers, but gardens forgive." I closed the notebook and looked at my hands. They were rougher now from soil instead of hospital soap, but they were still steady, steady enough to build, to write, to hold. When I stood, I caught sight of my reflection in the hall window. For a moment I saw the young nurse I had been, hair tucked under a cap, eyes alert, back unbent. Behind her was the older woman I had become, softer, slower, but unbroken. Between us there was no shame, no loss, only continuity. May's voice called from the car, ready to drive us home. "Coming," I said. The air smelled of basil and sunburned grass. I took one last look at the hall, the garden, the tiny sign that bore my name somewhere inside its nickname, and felt the whole story settle into place. I used to think justice was a verdict. Now I know it's a garden, something you tend every day, something that grows even when you're too tired to notice. When we reached the cottage, the lake was smooth as glass. Stars bloomed across it like seeds scattered in dark soil. I set the kettle on, the sound of boiling water rising like applause from another world. May handed me a cup and said, "To all the women who learned to stay standing." I raised mine. "To all the men who finally learned to listen." We laughed, clinking porcelain like church bells. Later, before sleep, I walked down to the shore. The moon floated above the lake, pale and full, carrying the weight of every story I had finally let go. I whispered to the water, "It's done." And the ripples answered, soft and certain, "Yes, Leona, it's begun."